I didn't tell you yet, did I, about my plan for apparel?
No.
So I decided this is at the end of 2021. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna mainly just wear mission-driven made stuff for the
Oh, you
year.
actually did tell me
I did
this.
tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't
And because I
remember.
remember because I said I don't know if I actually texted you back, but I was thinking in my head, it's like, oh yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
That's so my mo anyway.
I was like,
Yeah.
because it makes sense. Like a couple weeks ago, I was like, oh, I need a new, I don't know, new shirts or whatever I was looking at, and I was like, why don't I just use our own?
Yeah.
Like might as well.
Well, and the nice thing is it's super comfortable. It's this apparel that's made for working out, so it feels like it. One of the things that I noticed when I got some trainer clothes is so. Let me. I for a long time I trained in decent clothes, and they were like they were nice stuff that a trainer would wear. But at a certain point, I made enough money where I was like, okay, I'm gonna go spend like the $90 on the freaking exercise pants because I have that money now.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I won't go back. Like for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
I would come home from working or from training people, and I would immediately take off my training pants, like keep them nice and fresh and clean. That lasted for about a month, and
Oh
then
yeah,
like I just come home and I just like lounge in them for the rest of the day.
dude, all day
But
long. I'm always
yeah,
in gym clothes. It's so much more comfortable.
oh dude, I feel like you and I kind of did a little life hack, like in terms of like a lot of people have to get up and iron their clothes and put on their tie in the morning, and like we get to put on our own apparel. I mean, this is a bad example because I'm wearing Adidas,
Adidas,
Adidas, which I
Adidas.
also I do enjoy their clothing because it fits me well, but it doesn't fit me as well as Mission Driven Made. That's for
Oh,
sure.
good, good. And dude, I wore like uniforms and ties along the way too for like 10 years. So after that, I was like, I'm only wearing gym clothes the rest of my life. I'm never gonna fully shave again unless I have to, and I just decided that it's so much more comfortable too. Just
Oh yeah.
lounging around the house. It's also cool. Newer style of workout gear or apparel. It's made now to where it's like active lifestyle stuff. So basically, it doesn't have to just be the gym. You can wear it anywhere. It doesn't look like some of that crazy 90s stuff that we probably used to wear that was really boxy and the material was like not silk. It was like kind of a spandexy type
Oh
of,
yes,
you know what I'm talking
yes.
about?
Yeah, yeah. I think we haven't hit the. Oh, oh. Maybe this no. Yeah, like spandex polyester. Maybe, but
Yes.
I know what you're talking about. It's like parachute pants,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like that material. It's like the
Yeah.
windbreaker almost material, but it's like lighter and less. Yeah, that very 90s. There's
So
probably some
retro.
kind of yeah. Well, there's probably some kind of like PFA or PFAs. Is that what they're called? All the plastics that are all over these,
Oh,
like the Teflons and stuff. Like,
oh
there's probably
right.
some reason why like people aren't wearing them still today. But
We're
we
probably
should go.
slowly dying from our workout gear from the 90s.
It's hella real, dude. I still have a pair. Well, I guess probably won't be wearing them, but I've got a picture of me and my dad when I was, like I don't know, baby or whatever, toddler, 2 years old, and I had a parachute pants, and he was wearing the same parachute pants. And he
Nice.
posted to the Tri Valley Trainer Facebook page and said, "If you sign up today, you we guarantee we'll show up for a session in these, these parachute pants."
You get so many clients that way.
Right. It's like for me, they're probably going to be a
Yeah.
different pair, but I painted
Yeah.
myself a little bit in the corner with that one.
So you wanna play a game right now?
Yeah, I
You
love
wanna
games.
do some overrated, underrated for the audience today?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited.
Okay. Well, what we're gonna do, so we'll go through 8 different. I don't want to say fitness trends. It could be movements. It could be ways to train. We're gonna go through a couple supplements, and then Clayton and I are gonna give you all our opinion whether they are overrated or underrated. And just so we don't follow exactly what the other person says, I'll start with some of them first, and then maybe the last couple you'll start, and then I'm sure we'll have a different opinion, at least with a couple of them. So that'll be fun. Controversy, right? Isn't that fun?
Controversy.
It's so much fun. All right, well, let's start. You want, you know what? I'll kick off the first couple, and then we'll
Sounds good.
we'll switch after that. So let's start with static stretching. So
Mm.
static stretching. how it is normally applied. So static stretching is thinking of when you're stretching and you're holding the certain pose and you just sit there in that stretch. So static stretching, how it's applied most of the time, I think it is very overrated. Now here is the thing I don't like about static stretching. So studies have shown if you do static stretches, there's been a couple different studies, but for the most part, if you're holding a static stretch 45 seconds to 60 seconds or so, and you're doing this before you work out, it significantly lowers your ability to produce strength and produce power. So that is a detriment. That's definitely not a good thing. Now, here is where I do like it personally. So someone like me, my joints are sticky. I don't know like a better way to describe it. Like I have to do a little bit of static stretching before I back squat and things like that. So if you are not able to get into, for example, a back squat into a proper position due to your lack of flexibility, then we can apply some static stretching beforehand. But still, I would say be careful about not overdoing it. After about 30 seconds, 45 seconds, somewhere in there, you're putting yourself at risk to produce less power. But for someone like me, sometimes that's what I have to do, or else I can't get into certain movements the way that I want to. But it does kind of suck though, because I have noticed the times I've held static stretches for longer before my training session, I could tell I can't produce as much strength or power. But for someone like me, it's definitely worth it. And then as far as static stretching post workout, which seems to be a bit more popular. So I'll say, my mind is still open with static stretching post workout. It's very popular. I've seen, conflicting studies about this. And where I'm at with that is post workout static stretching. It could slightly delay DOMS, which is delayed onset of muscle soreness, but it doesn't necessarily do anything to the actual muscle damage that you cause during your training session. So to me, if you feel good doing static stretching, you have time to do it, and you're noticing, personal improvements with your flexibility or just how you feel even, then definitely do it. But for me personally, my warm-up consists before I train of more of dynamic type of stretching. So that's when you're going actively through the entire range of motion of that movement. So I always feel better when that's the bulk of what I do before I train. I'll throw in static stretching if I have to. All right, Clay. So overrated for me. What do you got on this one?
I'm gonna be a bad player for this game because, like so many things, my answer is gonna be somewhere in between. So
Okay.
we tend to talk about static versus dynamic or active stretching as kind of a before or after thing. So I'm really stoked that you touched on static stretching before and after, because those are two very different things, right? So that's a little context, a little preview. My answer is going to be nuanced. The most direct and least roundabout answer to the question for me is, what's the reason? What's the purpose? What are
That's
we doing
good.
it for, right? So,
True that.
for this, to try to not mince words, static stretching is an excellent tool for corrective action. So, one of the first things that I do as a trainer is I'm giving you exercises that give me the most information so I can learn about you. One of the first things that I pick up is, where are your personal set of muscle imbalances? We all have some set of muscle imbalances. The most common one we see these days is a pronation, a rounding of our upper back, because we're also used to sitting at a computer, along with really tight hip flexors, because similarly we're used to sitting a lot, right? So static stretching as corrective action to help promote muscular balance is, in my opinion, you need it. Any trainer, anybody who's actively training,
Yeah.
who's not using static stretching to help drive towards balance, one is either working with high-level athletes, or two, if you're not working with high-level athletes and you're not giving corrective action, you're not doing. You should check in and check in with somebody
Yeah.
who is more experienced, because
Yeah.
you're missing a piece here. That said, my own techniques, I always present a combination of active and dynamic or active stretching, because what I do is I make sure that the technique that I teach, and again, keep in mind, Jake's talking about, moving a lot of weight, high performance stuff. When it comes back to me and my practice, I'm a generalist and I am working with the general public. So the goal for me is not a performance increase. The goal for me is safety, right? So anytime we're talking about safety, we're talking about using a combination of techniques to create breadth and depth in terms of resilience and ability to move out in the world. So that said, every single time I have somebody do anaerobic movements, we're practicing going through that full range and getting that active stretch while we are doing the repetitions, particularly on that last repetition. And I'll tell you, all my clients will tell you, because they all are very used to me annoyingly saying, "Great job. Now take these back and go through one more rep."
Yeah.
Because it happens like time and time and time again. We're lifting and then we're like, okay, we're done. So we just, either put the weights down or hand them over. And then, me as a trainer, I'm like, you did great. Now I want you to get that dynamic stretch as you do that final rep. So, I wouldn't say underrated or overrated. I would say it's a tool to use at the appropriate time, in which case it is overrated and underrated. That's
Okay.
the better
All right.
answer. It
That's
depends
fair
on the
enough.
situation, though.
That's fair enough. I like that I forgot to mention that about using it really during your movement with your range of motion, because that made me think how I significantly increased my flexibility and overall range of motion, say in a Romanian deadlift, is each rep slowly trying to go down just a little bit more, but of course not letting my back round. But that has really helped me too, going through the actual movement with weight and going a little bit farther if possible. So that has definitely helped me as well.
Can I ask you, somebody who's less informed with the ins and outs of deadlifting? A lot of my lifting comes from the like we talked about, the generalist standpoint. So I don't really typically get into a lot of the really differences in technical lifts and stuff like that, because I just don't use them necessarily in the day to day. I use very kind of tried and true pieces with a generalist population, and then I kind of learn new things for people when they break out of that little box, right? Depending on what they're looking for. So my question is, am I mixing up a Russian deadlift and a Romanian deadlift, or are those two
Romanian
different
deadlift, and
deadlifts?
then there's Russian kettlebell swings. That would be my
Oh, so
assumption
I'm
of what
blending
you're.
the two.
Yeah, yeah. So
So a
already,
Romanian deadlift is the one where you're keeping your lower body static and you're really just hipping.
yep, your hip hinging and your knees are just slightly bent on that one.
Okay.
I used to
So
hate that
I've been
movement,
practicing Romanian
but
deadlifts.
I love RDLs now. I've been doing them a lot the last year. Even after my back injury, I just took it really easy with them, and now it's one of my favorite movements. But I despise RDLs like a year ago or so, but now they're really fun.
So they're my favorite. And so I've been calling. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. So looks like we're doing an active Clayton correction. But I've been calling them Russian deadlifts, and I must have been mixing them up with Russian kettlebell swings. But I've been practicing, and now I'm gonna call it right Romanian deadlifts, because I was just like, oh, RDL Russian in my mind.
Yeah. I always say
Must just
RDL.
register.
I don't ever say Romanian. Like RDL is just
Yeah.
what so.
Which makes sense. And, the nice thing is, again, like my correction from the other day, I'm really glad when my mistake wasn't some huge, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, I missed the nationality that I was by, significant, it's not like they're the same countries by any means, but Romanian to Russian is not like, I was trying to do a bicep curl when I was trying to do a squat or something, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so Romanian deadlift is the one where you hinge to the hip and you keep your legs pretty much static with a slight bend in the knees.
Yep.
So, what is the Russian kettlebell swing?
So
I'm gonna
Russian
look it up on my own. But
Yeah, so Russian is the kettlebell swing where the end of the movement finishes from like shoulder to eye level. So that would be the Russian kettlebell swing, and then you've probably heard of American kettlebell swings, which is where the end of the movement stops when you are all the way overhead with the dumbbell. So the
okay,
Romanian,
gotcha.
or excuse me, oh my gosh, the Russian is more popular than the American style, at
Right.
least from what I've seen.
When you said American, I was about to be like, oh, that's the one that I know and I teach, but it's the Russian that
Yeah.
I teach. And American, I've never taught. I've never even practiced American deadlift. That's you said. That's one. So this is the one where we see guys like throwing stuff like balls up in the air as high as they can, and then like letting it drop behind them.
Well,
That's
no.
basically.
So it's you have the kettlebell the whole time in your hand, and the movement finishes. You're still holding the kettlebell, but it's all the way overhead, and then you bring it back down. So that would be the American.
Well, so I guess really the better question, what I'm saying is, it wasn't even a question as much as when I have seen those videos, you know what I'm talking about, of the guys throwing the weighted ball up. That is
Oh yeah, like strongman
competitive.
stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it is a strongman competition, but I was just like I've seen it mostly in like YouTube videos,
Oh
random
right.
stuff,
Yeah.
just guys doing it. So a lot of the things listeners that you'll hear us talk about, you'll probably hear this happen quite a bit. I'm very much not kind of a name guy. I kind of, I use descriptions and I kind of tend to describe things, what I'm teaching, technically more than using whatever names that everybody else is always using. So you'll find this happen where I'm like, hey, Jake, what's that? And then we'll talk about it and be like, oh, that's what we're talking about. Okay. So this is really helpful for me because that's my weak point as a trainer and as a fitness professional is like I'm really lucky because I've got clients who are very understanding of that. And like I'll be training and I'll be like, and I'll trip up on my words and I'm like,
You're like,
this
just
is
do
what I
this
want from
movement.
you.
Yeah.
Luckily, my clients are like, okay, gotcha. Because me and words, ironically, considering that I'm doing a podcast with you.
Yeah, we'll start a new movement called the Russian deadlift. Then we'll just
The
start
Russian
going.
deadlift, yes.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
going to make it a real thing.
yeah.
Russians are going to be like, what?
All right, let's go on to number 2, and this is using sleds. So if I had to just a black and white answer, I would say these are highly underrated. I
Mhm.
love sleds because the diversity of movement that you can use them for, and also the different energy systems that you can really train by doing them. You can go lighter with them and you can push or drag a sled for a quarter mile if you want. You can load it up and do short, almost
Yeah.
sprint like type of things, pushing or pulling. You can add ropes there and use it more as a back type of movement. But what I really love about sleds is there's not this big eccentric part of the movement, which is normally what makes you more sore. So you can even use these, on active recovery days if you want, or of course just throwing them into your training. So I love that part that it can really be performed at a higher intensity if you want, and you might not necessarily feel sore due to there's not much eccentric action with them. So I'm going to go underrated with sleds.
I agree. Underrated, 100%. Um, from a functional standpoint, it doesn't get much more useful.
Yeah.
When else, like, the reality is all this training that we do will only come into play maybe 5 days of every year. You know what I mean? Outside of the training days, which obviously we're using it every training day. But in a functional standpoint, it's going to be, your car breaks down and you don't have AAA, So if
Gotta
you're
push.
if you're a big, strong dude, like, or not even big, strong dude, let me rephrase. If you're training in a way that emulates that functional movement out in the world, where it's not like, okay, you've got to lift this weight, but no, you've got to move this big object from one side of the room to the other. Well, now all of a sudden you've got, you're practicing something that you're going to have to do out in the world, knock on wood, right? Because hopefully nobody gets stuck, out today. But you'll be real happy that you were pushing that sled if you have to push a heavy car. That's for sure. So, that's a very specific example, but as you guys can imagine, there's a lot of functional application there. The other one I would say is, there's a lot of possibilities for strengthening joints and increasing or decreasing or sorry increasing our resilience to discomforts and pains for moving that big old thing. So it's functionally applicable in more than one way, I guess is what I'm saying.
So you got underrated as well?
Underrated.
Cool. All right, number 3, foam rollers. And so I'm going to go right away with overrated on these. Now, I want to start off by saying if you like foam rolling and it makes you feel good, do it. Do not stop.
Yeah.
It's not going to cause any harm. The thing is, they're promoted in a sense that they break up scar tissue, around your joints, which is definitely not true. The good thing about using foam rollers, it's somewhat similar to static stretching. What it does is it really affects your nervous system. As you're doing it, it desensitizes you from that feeling of pain when you're stretching a little bit, or that feeling of those knots that you have in your muscles. So it's a very short term effect, but if you can use that before you train and it helps you get into a better movement, then absolutely use the foam roller. But it's very short lived with what it does with your nervous system. So keep that in mind. But still, I'm going to go with overrated with how they are normally used in the gym.
So I'm gonna go underrated,
Okay.
but for the exact same reasons you just said. So all the things that Jake just said about the way that it can help relieve you if it's subjectively a tool that you enjoy, that's value. You know what I mean? So I think it's underrated for the value that it gets in terms of providing comfort and an action that can. I don't know if it actually helps in any kind of alignment way whatsoever. I'm not. I don't know that information, but I know when I use it, I feel calmer and I feel a little more relaxed and a little released. And while there might not be a, empirical value to that, I think it helps. And like Jake said, if it really comes down to if it helps you, and if it
Yeah.
doesn't, there's no real point. But if it does,
Yeah.
you know, rock it.
Yeah, that part I'm always really big on. If someone likes it and it's not a detriment to your goals, then go ahead and do it. That's the most important. So that is
Absolutely.
number 3. Let's go on to number 4, which is meal plans. So
Mm.
I'm gonna go with highly overrated for meal
Mm-hmm.
plans. Now, meal plans, it's a very popular thing with people asking if you can provide meal plans for them. Now, yes, they can help. Yes, they can be beneficial. But what starts to happen if someone is programming or giving you a meal plan, you're relying on someone telling you exactly what you have to do
Yep.
instead of the why behind it, if that makes sense. So I think it's smarter as a long-term approach for most people, to learn how to eat versus
Right.
what to exactly eat, and working more on behaviors. Now, not to say you can't do that if you're given meal plans. If, the person providing you those can give you both, help you with behaviors and educate you on the meals, that's great. But if you simply just tell someone eat this, this, and this, I don't really think that's doing much long term. I think it's a smart idea for longevity purposes. If someone, especially if they're trying to lose weight, which is what most people would use a meal plan for, it's very smart to teach very basic behavior stuff or behavior changes like slow down when you eat, chew your food completely, 30 to 40 times a bite, increase your protein a little bit, just really small things like that. So with meal plans, I'm going to stick with highly overrated.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you on highly overrated. It's just not practically sustainable for 99.9% of the population. For the reasons Jake said, but also it's cost money. You know what I mean? That means that you're not only buying your food, but you're paying for somebody to, you know, depending on your meal plan, either put it together for you or prepare it for you. But you're spending more to eat basically,
Yeah.
which is already, anyone who trains extensively can tell you that it's expensive to eating properly is expensive when you're training, especially if you're trying to put on muscle weight. So,
And yeah,
no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the good thing with meal plans, if the person is interested in being a bit more educated with why they're eating those things, where it can help. Normally, meal plans, people they're prepared pretty balanced with all the macronutrients. So you're going to see, your protein, which is normally going to be a lean meat for the most part. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
see your starch, for example, maybe a potato or something. You're going to have your veggies. And so just with seeing that, you could start mimicking the pattern of, okay, I approximately should eat this much protein. I should approximately have this much of my starch or carbohydrate, or I should have this much of my vegetables. So I think there could be benefit in that, but also most people that want meal plans, I don't think they're really interested in being educated on
Yeah.
long-term success with eating. So
That's a really important point to touch on because there are very obvious benefits, which is you don't have to think about it.
yeah,
If you're going to a good meal plan, someone who's creating a good meal plan, they're kind of taking all of that work out for you. But from an educator's standpoint, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to are we trying to catch somebody a fish? Or are we trying to teach
mm,
somebody how to fish?
yeah, I love that.
And the reality is, if we never teach somebody how to fish, then they never learn the skills of flexibility and
Yeah,
resilience and improvisation, which is part of the whole journey, right?
yeah,
It's kind of like people don't want to get injured while they're working out, and as trainers, we don't want them to get injured, and we don't want them to injure themselves. However, it is inarguably part of the journey to challenge your ability to deal with body stressors when we're talking about going on this fitness journey. And a natural byproduct of body stressors is eventual discomfort and injury. So a lot of what we're teaching people to begin with is how to mitigate that. And so when we look at it from that perspective and we look about meal plans, what good are we really doing as providers by giving people the answers instead of teaching them the questions
yeah.
and how to answer them?
And this is something I'll admit, especially when I was a brand new trainer, I did do this with some people. And after a certain point, I feel like that's going to increase like personal trainer burnout if
Yep.
what you're doing is just programming workouts for people and then giving them meal plans. If there's not that educational piece, I feel as though it's going to be very easy to burn out. And then obviously it's not going to benefit the client very much if they're not educated about why they're doing things.
We have a attitude in of kind of, and this goes back to what we've talked about, of the culture of scarcity, right? Of a lot of trainers should say, we don't, you and I personally, but have this attitude of I've got to continue not only provide value, but I've got to provide my client a value that they can't get without me. And in order to achieve that, I'm going to hold on to some piece of this knowledge so that you have to keep coming back to me in order to achieve this. And while that makes sense on paper from a number standpoint, ultimately it's the shot in the foot because what you're doing is you're not only withholding valuable information that's going to help improve your client situation, but really you're creating a dependent situation where they need you, and so as soon as you're removed from that equation, all of that value
Yeah,
goes away. So, is that really what we want to do as trainers, or do we
right.
want to give people value that they're going to continue to use for the rest of their lives, regardless of if I drop off tomorrow?
That's a fantastic point. Like giving clients autonomy with what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, yes, it'll probably be better if they are with you, but say they stop working out with you or whatever it is, that they have the ability and tools to go and work out or eat, on their own without you. So, that was a fantastic point. So, that was number 4. So, the last 4 here, Clay, we'll have you start these. I'll read them off to you. Starting with number 5, which is walking for exercise.
Oh, good one. I'm stoked that that this is the one that you directed towards me. Like so strongly underrated. Like as strongly as I can possibly phrase is how I feel as how underrated walking for exercise is, especially when we're talking about from the perspective of fitness professionals. We tend to think that our job is to get somebody in the gym and give them some novel experience where their brain's gonna be like, "Hey, that's really cool. I want to keep doing that." But the reality is that When we are focused on constantly giving our clients new, exciting exercises, a lot of times what happens is we are kind of blowing past the more basic foundational functional movements that are infinitely more valuable. And one of those chief ones is walking, because no, walking is not a sexy exercise. It's something that we all do, and from a value on the surface value perspective, why a client's like, what am I going to a trainer to walk for? Or at least that's the mentality, right? Well, the reality is as trainers, as a good trainer, the first thing, as we talked about earlier in this podcast, the first thing that we do is we evaluate, and walking for to begin with, it gives us invaluable analysis information, which we can then use pretty readily, because we haven't taught them some new exercise now that they've got to learn how to do it. We can enter in doing corrective action to give somebody better walking form and relieve some of the discomforts that come with walking, and simultaneously kind of slide in real easy, not give somebody something super challenging or emotional like push-ups to do, to get through, but we can give them a relatively easy win that has this enormous payoff, because now they're going to start walking around the world with a really good form. So a perfect example of this is we were taught in our youth to heel strike as we're walking or as we're running, and that's something that has kind of been pushed aside. And now what we teach for walking technique and for running technique is either landing somewhat flatly or mostly on your toes. I tend to teach on your toes and all balls of your feet touching first. And the reason for that is because it enlists now your interior tibialis, your calves, the muscles around your knees, your quads, your hamstrings, in a way that it wasn't before, to reduce the impact on the knee particularly. So these are all the specifics of what I would talk about with a client about walking, but the idea is we can take somebody's technique that they use all the time, give them some massive improvements that have minimal risk of injury and minimal challenge to the person's psyche and emotional state. So for me, it's not only underrated, but I have found, and this wasn't until more recently, I found that I tend to use it with almost every single client at least one time.
I'm going to agree 100%. This is highly underrated. Walking, what I love about it is there's low skill compared to other movements. So just about everyone can walk. And for me personally, like my own personal anecdote, it's something that I do every day. I love how it makes me feel. I walk a lot every single day, but it's cool because there's actually studies behind this too. And somewhere comparing, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but 8,000 steps per day versus someone that only takes 4,000 steps per day. The all risk mortality of the person taking 8,000 steps per day, it decreases by like 50 or 51%. I mean, that's a significant number. So it's easy to implement into most people's lifestyle. You can do something as simple as, okay, after I eat dinner, I'm going to go on a 15-minute walk, and just start really easy like that. And that does add up over time. I've noticed too, whenever I'm under a certain amount of steps every day, I don't feel as good. I don't feel as clear or productive. So I'm going 100% underrated on this one. Underrated. So moving on to number 6, and that is tempo training.
Tempo training. So, this one is a little bit mixed for me, because it comes back down. The value comes back down to if it's something that you enjoy. Don't let anything me or Jake say ruin that for you. First of all, if you enjoy tempo training, do tempo training. Take into account the things that we're about to say, and try to use technique to help mitigate them. The first thing that I'm going to say is my answer is overrated. It is just overrated. Not to say it doesn't have value, right? But I do think it's overrated primarily because a lot of things with tempo training, um, you have impactful movements that are involved where they don't teach you how to use impact. So, well, let me rephrase. Not impactful, forceful movements, because impact would imply that we're actually hitting something, right? So forceful meaning like, a lot of tempo training is like, ooh, 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 you're kind of doing these punches, right? But nobody teaches you how to throw a punch. Nobody teaches you turn at the hips, turn at the core, and then, use your whole body to throw that punch, right? People are just for their tempo. And there's different kinds of tempo training. There's Roomba, there's, different dancing, but almost all of them have some kind of forceful movement to them. And the problem with that is when you're not taught to do that movement effectively and appropriately with through your kinetic chain, what happens is you're likely not only to not get any value out of that, but you're likely to throw out a delt or whatever it may be, tweak something because you're moving without having been properly taught that movement. At least that's my impression from the tempo training that I've been exposed to. So definitely overrated for me.
So the tempo training I was referring to is the like doing movements slow and in cadence. So for
Oh,
example, like if someone was given a tempo back squat, it's you guys have possibly seen this program before. Maybe you've read it. So the numbers that you're going to see after the back squat, this is just an example. So say 3, 2, x1. So what that means, this is a form of tempo. 3 would refer to it takes you 3 seconds on the negative portion of the back squat. Once you get down to the bottom, that would be 2 seconds that you're going to pause. The X means you're going to explode up, so you're going to stand right up. And then once you are at the top, that 1 would indicate you're going to rest there for 1 second. So the tempo that I'm specifically referring to is essentially doing your training slow, and
gotcha.
you're going to have less weight. So a lot of people are very specific. They'll write in numbers like that. But for
Uh-huh.
me, when I personally do tempo training, I'm just doing
Gotcha.
it really slow. And
Yeah.
for me, I personally think tempo training is underrated. And
So sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I
yeah,
don't want everyone to go off on what I just said based on that because I was talking about something completely different. So I'll get in. Again, I double apologize for interrupting you. Won't
oh no, no. What do you want to finish
But I
this type
do,
of tempo
yeah.
training? What you think of it?
Yeah, because I was talking about something completely different. When we're talking about tempo training, I thought we were talking about basically like dance training. You know what I mean, or aerobics type stuff. Um, what you're referring to as tempo training, I call low and slow. I call time modifications, and not only are they underrated, but they're invaluable. That's every single every single technique that I teach until somebody's ready to go into more advanced, more forceful lifting is always what you call tempo training, which I have not referred to it as before. But yeah, so completely different answer for me
So
based
you'll
on
go
that.
underrated on that one then?
I would go even so far to say not even underrated as much as yes underrated, but it's invaluable. It's a skill.
Invaluable.
Those are skills that if you're not using it as a trainer, you're missing something too. I
Yep.
think. So again, apologies for the interruption, but now that
Oh,
I've
you're
actually
good.
said what I
You're good,
thought
dude.
about it.
Yeah, I love tempo training, and there's a lot of application for it. So the first one I would say is someone that is a beginner. So if you're teaching someone, say, a goblet squat, that's when you're holding a kettlebell around your chest area and you're squatting down and standing back up. Tempo training really helps someone improve their motor control and their movement pattern because they're taking their time through the entire movement. Also, you can't cheat your way through any movements
No.
when you're doing tempo style training because you can see where your flaw in the movement might potentially be messed up. So, a beginner, this is great. Tempo could also be applied to not necessarily when you're doing a deload, but when you are going through training cycles where you're lifting a little bit lighter, tempo can be applied there. And where I really like this, and I personally utilize this and noticed success, was after an injury. I loved doing tempo training. I would go way lighter. I could see where the flaw in my movement was, and I would never go up in weight until I was comfortable with my movement pattern. So, tempo training, the second type of tempo training that we talked about.
Yeah.
Clayton and I
Not
are
Zumba.
both going Zumba. Yeah, we're both going underrated for that. All right, so we
I
got.
will say I
Oh,
want to add
sorry. Go
on
ahead.
to that that with the tempo training that we also get to teach people how to nullify momentum with tempo training, which is a really important key when we're talking about the style of weightlifting. What happens a lot of times is people, when they're uneducated, they see advanced weightlifting techniques and say, "Oh, I'm throwing these weights around." But what you're really seeing with advanced weightlifting techniques is people are using forceful movements, but they're still in control of the weight. So by using this tempo training, you teach people how to maintain control of the weight at all times, and that gives you a much more solid basis in terms of learning how to control the weight and getting that final, they get that final stretch with, or they're getting the stretch with that final repetition as well. They all go hand in hand. So
Yeah, and you really have to take your ego out of these lifts when you're doing tempo training because you have to do a lot less weight, especially if your tempo cadence is, I've seen people do as much as 10-second negatives, 10-second holds at the bottom, and then up. So you really have to lift without your ego if you want to do the movement properly. That's another thing I really like about it.
I tend to teach 5 and 10 second. So I'll do 5-10 super slow is what I teach usually when we're talking about time modifications, and that'll be, say we're doing bicep curls. You're starting at the bottom. That's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're at the top. 5 or 10, 9, 8, and then so five takes you 5 seconds to go up, but then takes half as long to go down. So these modifications, whether we call them tempo training or we call them time modifications, they are not only do they hold value in and of themselves, but they hold value as different or novel exercises that your body may not be used to performing.
Cool. All right, moving on to number 7, and that is whey protein powder.
Whey protein.
Protein. What do you got in this one?
So I'm biased. I'm lactose intolerant. Not just I've got a problem with dairy. Lactose intolerance being that kind of underarching thing. So whey, I have a personal vendetta against because whey
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know, whey is the when you make cheese, you get curds and whey. What happens is the milk solids solidify into the cheese, and what you're left over with is all of the milky water, basically. And that's what whey is. So they take that milky water and they dehydrate it so that it's the powder, basically. And, people do more things to it than that, but that's in essence what it is. So if anybody who is there's a lot of people in our world today who are lactose intolerant and allergic to dairy. So for that reason, I'm going to say overrated. And just to give you an example, a real life example, we don't represent this company. We're not sponsored or anything, but I use Orgain protein powder with superfood stuff because it's pea protein and it's got all this other stuff that is, none of it is whey, peanut, almond, not that there's peanut and almond powder, protein powder, but you know what I'm saying is, like, you get these mixtures of stuff that I personally can't eat because I've got all these allergies and I know I'm not alone. So for that reason, overrated.
I'm going to go overall. If I had to pick one, I would lean toward overrated as well. So for someone that gets an adequate amount of protein, there is no need to consume whey protein. There's no advantages to that. But if someone has trouble consuming enough protein, that's when I would say, okay, whey protein would definitely have benefits for someone that can't get in the required protein or the optimal amount of protein that they need for the day. Because to me, if you are getting in enough protein with the whole foods you're eating, I don't see the need to get whey protein. But again, for example, when I personally use it is, say, early in the morning when I'm just not ready to have a big meal, I'll use it then. But generally speaking, I would still say that it's overrated.
Totally. So that's a good point to touch on before we move on to number 8. all these things that we're talking about, listeners, is we're not saying there's no value to. There is value to all these things. It's just as as the culture, we tend to we give things too much credit or too little credit, and this is just a note about that. Okay, so if you like anything on this list, don't think that we're saying not to do it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because we will. There are times where we'll be like, don't do this.
Yeah.
There's certainly times where we'll say that, but that is not today. Okay, number 8 is creatine.
Creatine.
So I'm gonna give a little bit of a cop-out answer, and then I'll give my real answer. The cop-out answer is I think it's both, because it's underrated for its value, as if you're in a situation where you have a purpose to to more actively build muscle, like you need it for some reason, there's not really many better tools, right? As far as effectiveness and safety are concerned. That said, most of us don't have a reason to need to increase our weight, our muscle gain, or decrease the time it takes to do that. For most of us, it's just a feeling of impatience, right? So if you can work through that feeling of impatience to build your body and your habits and your discipline with as few additions and supplements as possible, that's the way to go, because you're not always going to have access to all those additions and supplements. And the perfect example is pre-workout. I know we're not talking about pre-workout, but if it was on this list, I would say so highly overrated. And the main reason is because it basically acts as a crutch. And if you're so used to taking pre-workout to work out, if you lose that for whatever reason, now you'd have to deal with a whole new problem. It's the same thing as we talk about with medicines, right? And not to get into the medical side of things, but medicines are useful until you with certain medicines, until you're in a position where you have to stop, and then it creates a new problem, right? Again, not getting into the ethics of different medicines, just simply to say a crutch is useful, and I'm talking about a physical crutch, like you broke your leg crutch. A crutch is useful for helping you get places, but it ultimately acts as a hindrance towards your healing if you use it too much. Like when your leg is healing, you have to start using your leg, and if your leg heals and you just keep using that crutch, your leg's never going to build up the skills or the muscle that it needs to do its job. So, for whatever all that's worth. So I guess my answer is overrated. I don't know. It's somewhere in between, I guess.
Gotcha.
Technically overrated, but pretty neutral. Okay. Depends.
With creatine monohydrate, which is, I probably should have written that there specifically, I'm going to go with underrated for creatine. Now, like Clayton was mentioning, in pre-workout supplements, in that very specific scenario, I would say it's highly overrated. When it's mixed in with most pre-workout supplements, if you check the dose on most companies with their supplements, they severely underdose it. So you're probably going to get half the amount of the required dose that you should take anyway. So if it's in a supplement mixed with other things, I'm going to say it is overrated. But if we're talking about on its own, taking generally speaking, the dose being 3 to 5 grams per day and it's alone, I'm going to say underrated. And here's why. Creatine has been shown to help significantly with strength gains, with muscle. And then as we talked about a day or two ago on the podcast, the possible cognitive benefits that they've been researching, and also helping with things like memory, possibly depression. And then the newest one that I saw, which I had never heard until recently, possibly it could help with things like heart failure. So with the other day, I think I said hundreds of studies. There's actually thousands of studies with creatine, so I was wrong when I said that. With the thousands of studies, it has been shown to be completely safe from what the studies have shown. And this was even taking high doses such as 20 grams a day or so. So creatine, I think it's great, and when it's taken on its own. And I feel if someone wants to spend money on a supplement and they had to pick one, creatine is going to help most people meet their goals or assist people with getting to their goals. It's never going to be the main thing. It's the last 1%. I never want to act like supplements are the main thing. So creatine, I'm going underrated on this one.
Nice. I do want to touch, and you mentioned the word supplement, and I think it's important for us to touch us at this point, especially after we're talking about the whey and the creatine, and even the pre-workout. They're called supplements for a reason. They're
Oh, good one. Yep.
supplemental to your foundational
Yep.
nutrition. So that's for a lot of you, you're gonna be like, yeah, Doug, but for a lot of us, that's not a given. So it's really important to note here. Anytime we're talking about any kind of supplement, it's in the definition of the name. It's supplemental.
We forget that though, huh?
We do. We absolutely do.
Yeah.
And the heavy of that is that it really emphasizes how important eating is and what you're eating. And we're not getting, that's a whole other topic. And we'll get into that in future podcasts. But all the things that we're talking about here are secondary to eating, even especially we'll go back, we talked about meal plans. Whether you're using meal plans, whether you're using whey protein, whether you're using pre-workout, whether you're using creatine, all of that is almost negligible next to eating habits, getting the right foods in you, getting the right macronutrients, and so on and so forth, which we will continue to talk about in the future.
Yeah, that part I completely agree, is to remember supplement is in addition to not replacing something, because I know especially for me when I was a teenager, supplements to me, that was the most important thing. What supplements or stacks do you take? And you'd spend all this money and 90% of the supplements didn't do what they said they would do. So yeah, exactly. So I completely agree with your training, your sleep, with your recovery, your nutrition. Those are 100 times more important than taking creatine or any supplement. That is literally going to be the cherry on top to the rest of your training regimen, assuming that you're taking care of those foundational pieces first. All right, everyone, if you enjoyed our content today, go ahead and follow our show, and we would highly appreciate it if you gave us a 5-star review. If you just scroll down there on your phone, you're going to see a place to do it, and it will just take a couple seconds. It's going to help grow the show tremendously. You can find us on Instagram at @MissionDrivenMade, and also we have a free online private fitness community. It's a place you can go to ask Clayton or I questions. We are going to be there every single day to answer, whether it's a fitness, nutrition, mindset, lifestyle, whatever question you have, we will be there to answer. It's also a place where you can connect with other listeners of the podcast, and we welcome everyone regardless of your background in fitness. We would love to have you. You're going to find a link in the show description for that. All right, everyone, we hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. We love all of you, and until next time, stay mission driven.